It's me.
Thank you so much for coming out here with me, Christopher. I'm having a wonderful time. I think I deleted that out of my phone too. I just cut him out of my life. I think I met him sometime in June, probably early June. It might have been May. And then one day he told me that he had 2 kids. I was like, that's pretty cool. And started telling me about his kids.
That sounded like a sarcastic comment.
No, I thought it was kind of cute. I was like, oh, he's a dad. It was right around Father's Day too. So whenever that is that in June? He's telling me about him. He's pretty excited about him. And then he mentioned that he did have a significant other. I didn't know his significant other's name for a while. I think he was probably interested in me.
Are you okay saying her name?
It's Shannan. Yeah, or the beginning of July. It was right around my birthday. It's so sometime at the very end of June or the beginning of July.
Okay. And that's the first meeting you had outside of work?
Yeah. I mean, we kept it pretty simple, I guess, I mean, I'm sure I can give you a general idea, but to be honest with you, to pinpoint exact words, it's not gonna happen. To be honest with you, I mean, there were several discussions that we had about his current relationship and where it had gone and what it had caused. You mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that you're having a blast. I'm like, what is your plan? I told him a few times, I think that you should take the time to read some articles about what separation does to kids. And he's like, oh, they'll be fine, and I told him, I was like, even though they're small and you think that they'll be fine, I was like, I think you guys should just read about it just so that you guys are prepared in case, one of these two starts having a hard time with the fact that you guys aren't in the same house anymore, and I would tell him, I was like, there's pros and cons to it, because he was getting ready to do it. But I am not ready to do this, and he respected that.
I'm not saying you have to go to
just leave Jim alone. Jim does not need to be wrapped up in this.
I am so out of breath.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is that you are tuning in. This is Unapologetically Me, featuring me. No special guest, just me. Hello everyone, how are you guys doing today? I hope you guys are having a great day, a great week, a great weekend, whatever day it is that you clicked on this video. First thing I want to do is say thank you to all of my new subscribers. I have been overwhelmed and blown away by all the new influx of subscribers. I'm so happy that my content is starting to reach bigger audiences. So thank you so much for your support, for all of my subscribers who have been with me for a couple years now. Without you, I wouldn't have been able to grow on this platform. And honestly, I probably would have given up a long time ago. So thank you all so much. You have no idea how much it means to me. The best thing that you can do to support me is to subscribe, like the video, comment below. That is all the support I need. So thank you so much. Also watching the videos all the way through, right? Okay, so let's move forward here. In the last video, part 2, let me just say, for those of you who don't know, this is a series of videos. This is not just one random video on the case. This is a series. This is part 3 of what is probably going to be a 10-part series. Now, I have had some issues. Last week, we found out that the owners were going to sell the house.
that we've been renting for over 5 years now, and we still had a year and a half left. They have to sell the house, therefore they gave us about 60 to 90 days to move out. Yeah, while I figure that situation out, I am trying to get these videos out to you guys because it's important to me to get them out, and I know you guys are expecting them. So thank you so much for your patience. I always do tend to take a little bit longer to put videos out, but just bear with me. The next couple months, I'm going to be doing the best that I can. Also, you can always check out my community page. Anyway, I'm just going to shut up now and let's get into the video. You didn't come here to listen to my problems or hear me ramble.
5 hours later.
In the last video, part 2, which I do have to say, if you watched that entire video, you need to comment below, so I can give you some major props. The last video I put out was the longest video I have ever put out, and it was all about what was in the book by Shannan Watts titled Letters from Christopher. This video that I'm making right now, I'm not sure if I'm going to cut this one in half. It's going to be very long because, well, you'll see why soon. I have, however, posted an episode list on my community page so that you guys are all able to see what I have planned for this series. There's a lot, and I promise I'm going to get into as much as I can, as respectfully as I can. It will get controversial at times, but I believe that it is important to look at everything, whether or not it strays from the common narrative. The truth, more often than not, is found beyond the narrative. I am well aware that the rational mind does not go immediately to look at the worst in someone. Most people don't murder, right? Most people don't help someone cover up a murder. But we all know that there are people, seemingly normal, everyday people, that have murdered and have helped someone to cover up a murder, or even watched or took video of someone being murdered. It does happen. This video, as always, is in my opinion, on my understanding of the information that I have found on this case. I will be speculating where I feel it's necessary to fill in the blanks, though I will always remind you that it is speculation in my opinion. In this video, we are going to bring the focus back to Nichol Kessinger. We're going to talk about the inconsistencies in her story, her searches, her phone history, and that 6:16 a.m. ping, which will bring us to the person she called that initiated that ping, Jim Gutowski. One of the biggest questions I have is how it appeared that Chris and Nichol got very close very fast. According to both Nichol and Chris, they met at work for the first time around the end of May or beginning of June of 2018. They also both said that they began to quote unquote see each other in a more romantic way the end of June or beginning of July. So keep that in mind as we go forward, because we know from the discovery that while that is the narrative that Chris and Nichol were selling investigators, there was another detective that was not buying that narrative. Detective Michael Prill. And Detective Prill noted searches that were made by Nichol Kessinger that were dated all the way back to 2017. Searches for Chris and Shannan Watts. We were also told by Nikki herself during her last meeting with Detective Kobach that she had only been working for Anadarko for 4 months at the time she was let go after the murders. She told this to Hazel, one of the victim coordinators.
I mean, it is what it is. I've only been working with them for like 4 months. They don't really know me that well.
Now that would have put her starting month in April. There are some people who have speculated that Nichol could have started working at Anadarko Petroleum as early as March. We will get into why that is later on, but it is based off of interviews with coworkers of both Chris and Nichol, who alleged to have seen them together 6 months prior to the murders. Nichol Kessinger herself has said that she was in the morning meetings many times. Not always, but many of the times. Meaning to me that she first met, you see my air quotes, met Chris pretty quickly after starting her job at Anadarko Petroleum. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it's been my experience that in companies where you will be working as a team, any new hire to the team is introduced, and a morning meeting would be the most opportune time to make that introduction. Allegedly, the first correspondence between Chris and Nichol was via email. It was a group email that was sent from Nichol Kessinger to the team, and Chris responded privately to that email. From there, they exchanged a few more emails, and according to Nichol, they texted via Chris's work phone and eventually moved their conversations to Chris's personal phone, once Nichol could see that their correspondence was not work-related at all anymore. This is the original email from Nichol to the team, which was sent on June 5th of 2018. It says, "Gentlemen, I spoke with my gas monitor vendor regarding your application access. Our account has been reset. Please continue to use the same credentials you were provided upon receiving your unit. Let me know if you continue to have issues or require anything further. Best regards, Nichol Kessinger." Chris replies to this email by thanking Nichol, but not within the group. He sent only her this personal thank you. On June 12th, the emails begin again, with Nichol emailing Chris, saying, "Chris, thank you for being honest with me this morning. Truthfulness is so underrated in our culture. Saludos cordiales, Nikki." Chris then replies, "Nikki, I'm a straightforward guy. Lying just complicates things. I think you are absolutely stunning, and from what I have learned about you so far, you seem like an amazing person. I hope to continue to get to know you better since we have a lot in common." Nikki replies, "Chris, agreed. It is always nice to find people you can relate to. I enjoy talking to you as well. I feel understood. I am looking for someone to build a beautiful life with. Seems so simple, but is so unrealistic sometimes. Build something similar to what you have done with your wife and those cute little girls. I do believe in karma, so out of respect for myself, you, and your family, I think it's best if we keep that friendship at work. By the way, I keep the conversations we have between us." Can I just say something real quick? Okay, she says, "Out of respect for myself, you, and your family, I think it's best that we keep our friendship at work." But then she throws in there at the end, "By the way, I keep the conversations we have between us." Almost like a hint, like I'm saying this, but that's not really what I want, and hopefully you get that and you don't leave me alone or keep it just at work. I don't know, just speculation, just an opinion. Chris writes back, "Nikki, yes, a beautiful life is something that is hard to find in this world since people always seem to have an agenda for everything. I do believe in karma, so I agree with that as well. Any conversations we have will stay between us. No need to worry there." Then he goes and gives her his work number. "My work number is blah, blah, blah. If you need to get a hold of me in the field." Sometimes email can be tricky with my spotty service out here. I have an early morning meeting and then I'm doing lotto for a construction crew on various sites all day. So if I don't see you tomorrow, I hope you have an amazing day. Again, he's saying, yeah, I agree, karma, it's not good for us to take this out of work, yet here's my work number so you can get a hold of me because my emails may be tricky. Why would she need to get a hold of him via phone differently from any of the other guys there? Although I've heard things, but let's just move on. Now, thanks to Nikki deleting all of her correspondence off of her phone, we don't have a lot to go off of in regards to text conversations between Nikki and Chris, but we do have some key evidence of their relationship being far more serious than Nichol portrayed to detectives. One of these pieces of evidence is a birthday card from Christopher to Nichol that reads, "Nikki, a year of stuff you love to do and brand new dreams to make come true. One that brings you smiles and laughter and fills your heart with love long after. A million moments day by day that simply take your breath away. Have a happy birthday, as wonderful as you are." Now that was what the card said, and Chris also wrote some extras on there, such as, quote, "This sums up you. Big things will happen this year. Dreams will come true. That smile, that stare, that laugh, that giggle gets me every time. You are truly an amazing, inspirational, and electric woman that takes my breath away every time I see you. You are wonderful. Don't ever stop being you. Happy birthday, Chris. Well, now we know why she does that creepy ass giggle in those voicemails. He liked it. He told her he liked it. He also writes up at the top, quote, "Your energy is so insane. You heat me up, you make me melt, and then you cool me down like rain," unquote. We got a little poet here. Now, this card's dated July 3rd of 2018, which is Nichol Kessinger's birthday. But another obvious thing about that date is that if you go off of Chris and Nichole's timeline of when they became serious, they said that it was at the end of June or beginning of July. So what, approximately 2 weeks at the point this card was written and given to Nichol? Just a question. Does it appear to be likely, based off of Chris's intense words on these cards, that it had only been 2 weeks, give or take, for Chris to develop the feelings he expressed in this card? In my opinion, no. Especially when you take into consideration some text messages found on Chris's phone to Nichol from June 29th of 2018, 5 days prior to the July 3rd birthday card. Again, we don't have Nichole's part because she deleted everything, but that doesn't really matter here because Chris says it all. June 29th at 7:34 p.m., Chris Watts texts, "I'm still going to see you. It won't be as often as we like, but I will make it happen. You think you're the only one addicted right now? I'm so hooked on you." At 8:12, Chris texts again, "Sleeping without your warm body next to me isn't going to be fun tonight." There are 2 text messages from Nichol that were recovered from the very next day, June 30th. At 4:28 p.m., Nichol texts Chris, "I have an idea, by the way. I have a free hotel stay at the Holiday Inn. Not sure if you can swing it this month, but we can road trip to the mountains or southern Colorado for a day or 2 if you want. Won't cost a dime, LOL." That same day, June 30th, 2018, at 6:39 p.m., it appears that Nichol responds to Chris with this text. "She supports me, but her parents were in a situation like that when she was a kid and it came up. It won't bother me. I'm not going to stop seeing you. I made up my mind." And then she asks, "Are we bad people?" On July 1st, 2018, at 1:25 p.m., Chris texts Nikki, "I'd love to be part of it. Being in your life is something I crave," which, in my opinion, sounds like a response to a question being asked by Nichol. Total speculation here, of course, but "I'd love to be part of it. Being in your life is something I crave" makes me think that she maybe said, "if you want to be in my life," or, something like that. Also, on this day of July 1st, 2018, Chris texted Nichol a sweet little goodnight text telling Nichol that he enjoyed their conversation, and he ended that message saying, "Sweet dreams, little Romeo here." Now, in this video, I am going to go through the entire timeline where Nichol is concerned. But first, I wanted to go through a few things up front that, in my opinion, point to one major question that everyone has. Did Christopher Watts and Nichol Kessinger meet before May of 2018? Here's another card that Chris gave Nichol. This one dated July 30th of 2018. Chris writes, "Nikki, wow, where do I even start? The first day I saw you, you took my breath away. The first day I had the guts to talk to you, I got lost in those stunning green eyes. The first day we hung out in the park together, I knew I was addicted. The first time we kissed, I knew I had met the most amazing, unique, and electric woman ever. We have a lot of firsts together, Nikki, and I want to keep having them with you. All night, till the sun comes back. I wanna love you like that. Love, Chris." So he brings up the firsts, so we know they have already had that conversation, by July 30th. And just like the first card that Chris gave Nichol, he added his own words to it, but the actual card reads, "A kiss, a touch, a smile, a squeeze, a look, a laugh, a tickle, a tease, a nod, a grin, a cuddle, a hug. a sigh, a hum, a nuzzle, a tug, a word, a wish, a whisper, a toast. Love in the little things matters the most. Sounds like a Dr. Seuss rhyme. Thanks for every one of them. Chris also added in his own little quotes for Nikki, quote, when I'm around you, I can feel peace in the atmosphere, quote. Another one, quote, I can't resist the feel. You put me on another level, unquote. And, quote, you keep my engine roaring when you're pushing on the pedal, unquote. I don't know if that's from a song or not. The last one is, quote, you bring me right back down to earth, unquote. I kind of think that might be from something, but anyway. This card, again, was dated July 30th of 2018, and according to the timeline given to law enforcement by Nichol and Chris, they would have been, quote unquote, talking for about 2 months, but only romantically involved for about 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks max. So, like I said, I've put together my own version of a timeline noting all communication between Nichol Kessinger and Chris Watts based on what we know to be facts. Now, when I say facts, I mean from physical and visual evidence, such as police reports, phone call logs, text messages that were recovered, and of course, the 1,960 pages of discovery. Of course, I will be speculating to fill in blanks, but I will always remind you that whatever I am speculating on is speculation and just my opinion. The first searches that were made by Nichol Kessinger were actually not listed in the discovery, and these were searches for Chris Watts, and they began on or about August 3rd of 2017. While not listed within the timeline, these searches were mentioned in the discovery. It says, several searches for Christopher Watts can be found prior to August 12, 2018. These entries appear to have been deleted. I searched for the numbers, and here you see this is Chris's phone number and Nikki's phone number, and found no results. I did locate name searches for Chris Watts dating back to August 3rd of 2017, and Shannan Watts dating back to January 7th of 2018. These entries were deleted, but were recoverable. So this first search that Nichol did was for Chris Watts at 11:02 a.m. on August 3rd of 2017. She searched for Chris Watts, and like I just read to you from the discovery, there were several of these searches made by Nichol Kessinger, and all were deleted, but recoverable. On September 1st of 2017, Nichol searches for Shannan Watts. And as you probably just noticed, there's also entered in discovery a search done by Nichol of Shannan Watts January 7th of 2018 at 5:52 a.m. with the same entry number of 2290. Which one of those is accurate, I don't know. I am leaning more towards there were 2 searches. That's my opinion. I think they are both accurate. I think she searched for Shannan a month after she searched for Chris, and then later on, she searched for Shannan again. But again, that is just my opinion. And we'll talk more about that later on. Now let's move on to April of 2018. Nichol begins working for Anadarko Petroleum as a contractor. She gets this job via Tasman Geosciences. Between April 26th and May 1st of 2018, Shannan Watts flies to New Orleans for Thrive Palooza. Chris is left at home to, quote, hold down the fort, unquote, while Shannan is away for work. Moving into May of 2018, both Nichol and Chris say they meet towards the end of May 2018 and only really talk in passing here and there. They say they had not yet communicated outside of work. It was strictly business. May 5th of 2018, Shannan posts a very sweet message on Facebook about Chris, and this is important because one of the other questions many of us have about Nichol is that she claimed that she didn't know anything about Shannan or Chris even being married, right? Nikki said she didn't even know Shannan's name at first, not for a while. This is why these unexplained searches are so coincidental. They point to Nichol not only knowing about Shannan, but also Nichol having access to everything going on in the Watts' lives, including that the relationship between Shannan and Chris, according to Shannan, was strong and healthy and thriving. The pun is actually intended. And also having access to public documentation of the pregnancy from the moment that Shannan let the world know. There are a few different dates out there of when Shannan first told Chris about baby number 3 being on the way. May 8th being one of them, May 29th being another. We know that the video of Chris's reaction to the news of baby Nico was posted on June 11th to Facebook. So that would have been the soonest that Nichol Kessinger would have been able to find out the news if Chris hadn't already told her, but Chris knew about the baby in May. There is, of course, speculation as to why she would have waited so long to post that video. My 2 cents on that would be she was excited. She wanted to tell Chris. She wanted to get a legitimate reaction video, but she wasn't quite far enough along to publicly post that she was pregnant. Many women do not feel comfortable posting a pregnancy on social media, and some don't even like telling their families about their pregnancy until the 2nd trimester, or at the very least until they have their first prenatal doctor visit. I don't think there was any reason other than that she didn't post the video when it was taken. In that video, she has the test. She says a few times, it's just the test.
That's just the test.
I know. It just says the pink is going to be girls.
I don't know. Just the test.
That's awesome.
Like, she hadn't even had her first ultrasound yet. So I can totally understand why she would have been excited to tell Chris, but not yet ready to tell the entire world, essentially. Of course, that is just my opinion. June 2nd of 2018, Hazelbrook Sober Living made a payment to Nichol Kessinger on Venmo titled Birthday Cabin. I don't know about this Hazelbrook Sober Living. Why would they be paying Nichol? Does anybody know the connection of that? On June 8th of 2018, Jim Gutowski paid Nichol on Venmo for what looks to be cake and way too much beer, as the emoji seems to be puking. On June 14th, 2018, Chris adds Nikki to his work phone along with 200 others, including Shannan. June 17th, Shannan posts to Facebook another very sweet message about Chris for Father's Day. Yet another public post that Nichol would have seen if she had searched for Shannan's Facebook. June 18th, 2018, Nichol paid Jim for laughs and tents. So they went camping or something. June 22nd, 2018, Chris adds Nichol's phone number into his personal phone under the name APC Health Safety Environmental, which was her job title at Anadarko. This was the same day that he and Shannan left for San Diego for that Thrive trip. They went there with Josh and Cassie Rosenberg. June 24th, 2018, Jim paid Nichol for pillow talk. June 26, 2018, Chris texts Troy McCoy that he landed back in Colorado at 2 a.m. So Chris is now back in Colorado. June 26th. On June 29th, Chris texts Nichol those text messages that I read you earlier in the video about being addicted and how sleeping without Nichol's warm body next to him was gonna suck. Now I wonder when Chris would have slept next to Nichol prior to June 29th. Come to think of it, didn't I say there was a Thrive trip back in, when was that? Oh, yes, April 2018. Shannan posted to Facebook that Thrive Palooza was coming up, and this year it was going to be held in New Orleans, and she was extremely excited about this trip. She posted her itinerary for the summer here, and the first trip was Thrive Palooza, April 26th through May 1st. Unfortunately, Chris would not be going on this trip with Shannan. On April 27th, 2018, the day after Shannan arrived in New Orleans, she posted this message to Facebook, again, giving props to her amazing husband, Chris. Is it possible that Nichol and Chris met up while Shannan was in New Orleans? I mean, anything is possible, especially when it comes to these two, right? I mean, it's virtually impossible to get the same story twice from them, so I'd say it is possible that they left out a meeting or two. I don't know, but I'm just saying it's possible, in my opinion. June 27th of 2018, Shannan takes the girls to North Carolina. where they would visit family and Shannan would be able to do some networking for Thrive. They would be there for a total of 6 weeks, and Chris would join them that last week of that 6-week visit, leaving him living the quote-unquote bachelor life for 5 weeks at home in Colorado. Interestingly enough, a text message from Chris to Nichol at 2:42 p.m. reads, quote, "Promise, I'm about loyalty, truthfulness, and being dedicated. I don't like playing games, unless it's role-playing, winky face. If you want me there, I will be there. Ice cream, cookies, and lollipops. Sounds like a cheat meal night, LOL." I don't know about you guys, but it seems to me that Chris may have gone straight to Nikki's house that exact same day Shannan left with the girls for North Carolina, which would have been the 27th of June. So we now have 2 times that Nikki could have spent the night with Chris. Back the end of April or early May, because we do know that Nichol was working there in April. So she had to have met Chris in April when she started, and if she started in March, then she met him then. I mean, at least it's totally speculation, but like I said, if she started working there, she was probably introduced to the team within the first week of working there. So I don't know. The first opportunity that Chris would have had to meet up with her would have been when Shannan was in New Orleans. And then we have June 27th. Shannan is gone. She's in North Carolina, and it would appear that Chris and Nikki were in communication. So to think that he may have went to her house on June 27th, I don't think that's that far-fetched. Anyway, let's move on. Going back to June 29th, 2018, Nichol paid Jim for food. On June 30th, 2018, Chris searched for tickets to Bandimere Speedway. It does not have the time that he searched for these tickets, but also on June 30th, Nichol sends a text message to Chris that says, "I have an idea, by the way. I have a free hotel stay at the Holiday Inn. Not sure if you can swing it this month, but we can road trip to the mountains or southern Colorado for a day or 2 if you want. Won't cost a dime, LOL." That was at 4:28 p.m. on June 30th. They must have had more of a conversation, but the next text that pops up from Nichol to Chris on June 30th is at 6:39 p.m., where she tells Chris she supports me, but her parents were in a situation like that when she was a kid and it came up. "It won't bother me. I'm not going to stop seeing you. I made up my mind." And then she asks, "Are we bad people?" I'm not sure who she is. It could be her mom. It could be her friend. I don't know. But Nikki does what she wants. I think we all know that. And she always has, from what I can gather from her. Of course, that's just my opinion. But at the end of the day, she's going to do what she wants. And she admits to not really caring that this may have destroyed somebody else's family in the past. But it doesn't bother her. And she's not going to stop seeing Chris, no matter what consequences may come of it, like breaking up the marriage and family. July 1st of 2018 at 1:25 p.m., Chris sends that text to Nikki saying, "I'd love to be part of it. Being in your life is something I crave." We talked about this one earlier too. Also, on July 1st of 2018, Shannan Watts posted to Facebook a photo of her Lexus looking shiny and sparkly clean with a caption that says, "Chris deep cleaned my Lexus inside and out. Hashtag luxury auto bonus earner. Hashtag paid for by Lavelle." A lot of people don't know this, but that Lexus was paid for by Lavelle. She sold enough and got high enough of a status that whatever car she bought, Lavelle would send her the monthly payment for it. I think I can't remember 100%. We're going to get into this later, probably briefly too, but I think like she got $800 a month for her car bonus. So she picked a car within that, and that also pays for her gas, according to her, and her car insurance. So they weren't paying for that car. That was paid for by Lavelle. But my point is, while Chris is texting Nikki, he's also deep cleaning Shannan's Lexus. So I don't know. It's like he's trying to keep Shannan happy
And also Nikki, I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up. Another text from Chris to Nichol, which I think we talked about earlier too, was at 9:23 p.m. Chris texted Nikki, "Conserve it while you can. I enjoyed our conversation tonight. Sweet dreams, Nikki. Kissy face." July 3rd, 2018, Chris gives Nichol that birthday card that we talked about earlier in this video. July 4th, 2018, Chris spent the evening with Nick and Amanda Thayer and watched fireworks. Nichol was at a Rockies game with Jim, as is reflected in text message from Chris. Nichol's obviously had been deleted by her, but there were a few texts to Nichol from Chris's phone, such as these. Nichol also paid Jim on Venmo for Rockies. Throughout the day, Chris texted Nichol talking about the rain and how he'd like to see her wet and whatever. But at 11 p.m., he sends a text to Nichol saying that he just pulled up to her place. He ended up spending the night, and in the morning, he woke up to several missed calls from Shannan. Chris said that he went outside to call Shannan back, and she was livid. So even though Chris and Nichol had planned to spend the day together, Chris told her that he was just gonna go home, that Shannan was really pissed, and that he just needed to go home. This was without a doubt the day it really sunk in to Nichol that she was second fiddle. She was indeed the mistress, nothing more. So Chris leaves the house, and Nikki most likely begins to unravel, in my opinion. She eventually got in her Toyota 4Runner and she drove to Chris Watts' home, desperate to clear up where she stood in their relationship. Again, in my opinion, this would have been after just a couple of weeks of being serious, according to the romantic timeline that both Nikki and Chris gave law enforcement. During this visit at Chris's home, Nikki would say that she just went there to help him with the MyFitnessPal app and get his macros in order. But that was not the only thing that was discussed. And Chris Watts also told Sherilyn Cato that he felt that Nichol didn't want him to be alone in his house. That she may have thought if Chris was alone in his family home, he would begin to regret his affair and end things with Nikki. Chris says he probably would have had Nikki left him alone. There is talk about how Chris and Nichol ended up having sex on that kitchen island as a ploy by Nichol to maybe mark her territory. The idea that now, whenever Chris looked at that kitchen, he would be forced to think of Nichol rather than family moments. And in my opinion, it's nasty. In my opinion, it would also have been a way for Nichol to show dominance over Shannan, who frequently did Facebook live streams from that very kitchen, cooking at that island. And this comes from a second book released by Sherilyn Cato titled The Many Faces of Christopher Watts, which has a lot more of Sherilyn's opinions from what she learned from Chris. Now, I don't know about what to say about that book. We're not going to do like what I did with the last one with it, because a lot of it is her opinion, in my opinion. It's not really clear what she knows to be like factual from Chris. Not that we can take much of what he says as fact, because he lies about everything, but it's more like her opinion of what she thinks. So I mean, if you want to order it, it's on Amazon. It's not even that expensive either. I think the paperback's like $11. So anyway, we'll talk about some other things that were listed or that were mentioned by Sherilyn Cato in that book. Moving on to July 6th of 2018, Shannan texted Chris to call Vivint before I flip. Honestly, people were saying that I'm like talking bad about her because I called her type A personality. I never meant that as a bad thing. I'm very type A personality. Like, I giggled at that text because that sounds like something I would say to my significant other. Like, call them before I flip my shit. Anyway, Chris texted Shannan back with, "They are sending a sensor for the garage door. I tried moving it like they said and it didn't work." I just wonder what was going on with that security system. Was Chris messing with the security system to keep Shannan from seeing what he was up to? I mean, in my opinion, probably. Shannan also gets alerts on her phone
about all Vivint activity. So either he didn't think about that, or he figured he would just explain it all away if she said something. There are some things that I found out about the Vivint home security system, and we will likely get into that more in a later video, but quickly, from what I found out, I have to believe that law enforcement has the recordings of what went on in the Watts home, including what happened the morning of August 13th of 2018. At the very least, they would have audio and video recordings from the motherboard. I forget what Vivint calls it. It's called something, Star Control Panel or something. It's the main control panel, the motherboard, which was located at the interior garage door of the Watts home, the door that was leading from the house into the garage. And it's chilling to think about what was captured in just the audio that morning. I mean, can you imagine? This is yet another big piece of the puzzle that we will never have. This would prove whether or not the girls were still alive, and possibly if anyone else was there that morning, any other voices that were picked up. Also, they would have the front door cam footage, I would assume, but we will never see that either, even if they do have it. There are so many pieces of the puzzle that are unable to be put together because we don't have the pieces. They do. There are so many questions that have answers, yet we have yet to get those answers. Hence the movement for a certain someone to be investigated. That is the purpose I'm making these videos. Moving on to July 7th of 2018, Nikki made her first call that we can see to Chris's personal phone. She also made a payment to Jim on Venmo for slacker planning fee. Whatever that means. At 7:19 p.m., Chris's phone connected to a router at the Rusty Bucket restaurant. At 8:44 p.m., Chris's phone connected to the Crushed Red restaurant. It would appear this was he and Nikki's first outing. After this dinner, or whatever it was, Chris and Nichol went to the late showing of the new Jurassic World movie. Nichol would say that they initially tried to get into the 9 p.m. showing, but it was sold out. So they sat on a bench outside of Victoria's Secret and they waited for the next showing. July 9th, 2018. Now this was the day that what everyone is calling Nutgate happened. Nutgate is the term that Cindy Watts used to describe the incident, and it appears to have stuck. Now, we've already talked about this, so I'm not going to get too much into it in this video, but this is when Cindy knowingly put Cece's life in danger by having pistachios very close to her. Cece was allergic to tree nuts, and pistachios were one of the nuts that she was very allergic to. Cindy was told this. She was asked by Shannan to keep them away from the girls, which Cindy allegedly and essentially blew off, and Shannan completely flipped out. So much so that it became a rift within the two families and would end up being one of Chris's triggers to continue his contempt towards Shannan. Many of you know there are a couple of narratives that have circulated about Nutgate. We will look at them in a different video if necessary, but the big thing to remember about this situation is that it set the tone for how the North Carolina trip was going to go for Chris when he would end up joining his family for that last week, and probably gave him major anxiety up until that point. He knew what he was going to walk into when he got there. At 11:09 a.m., Nichol texted Chris, "You're so considerate." I wonder what he said. 8:16 p.m., Shannan discussed with Chris about Nutgate, what happened with Cindy and the ice cream, and suggested that Chris call his parents and tell them that they were the ones in the wrong, not Shannan. Chris told Shannan that he would call his dad and tell him and, quote, set this right, unquote. After talking to Shannan, he went and checked the value load of his Anadarko gift card, which was $250. Now, I don't know if he put $250 on it or he was just checking, but at that time, he checked his Anadarko gift card, which we know he used to pay for dinners with Nichol. The value was $250. July 10th, 2018, Shannan texted Chris for the first time about being distant. Now, this was the first time via text that Shannan showed signs that she was worried about her relationship with Chris. The incident between Shannan and Cindy had been so traumatic for Shannan, and I can see why. I mean, I would have been livid. I don't know that I would have handled the situation much differently if it happened the way Shannan said it happened, which I do believe it did. Shannan went on multiple platforms and groups on Facebook venting about it and looking for support from other moms with children who have nut allergies. Shannan appeared to want reassurance that she was not overreacting to the situation, and she got that reassurance. And she refused to budge when it came to the girls being at the Watts home after this occurred. Chris felt that this created a quote-unquote dagger between him and his family for yet another time in their relationship. There had been several times in the past where Chris was having to take sides when it came to his parents and Shannan, mainly Cindy. Again, that is for another video coming up in this series. So let's move on to July 14th, 2018. Chris and Nichol visited the Shelby Mustang Museum and looked up 24 Karat Bistro, I'm guessing for lunch. People have pointed out that this day was a turning point in a few ways. After the museum and lunch, Nichol told law enforcement that Chris had to stop home to take care of Dieter, the family dog. This was the second time that Nichol admitted she was at the Watts home. She told investigators that while she was there, she felt very out of place. While she had been there once before, she never really looked around, that she sat on the carpet of their front living room and she never really ventured any further. This time, however, Dieter, seeming to sense that Nichol was not supposed to be there, led Nikki up the stairs where she saw photos of the Watts family. She also saw the girls' bedrooms and the playroom with all the books. She was hit by the reality of what she was getting in between, what would be destroyed by she and Chris's affair. And she had a moment of pause. She came back down the stairs where Chris says he found her with an expression of shock on her face. He said she appeared blank and in a daze. They sat on the couch, they had a conversation, and Nikki really put it on Chris that she was concerned. She wasn't sure that she could do this anymore. She pointed out the beautiful home and the family that Chris built with Shannan and asked him how it was possible that he would want to give all of this up. But there was more to that conversation. That conversation became so intense that Nichol left at one point and sat in her car where they texted back and forth before Chris finally convinced her to come back inside so they could talk. They talked about things that Chris had not been forthcoming with, such as the last time he and Shannan were intimate, where at first he told Nichol that he and Shannan were last intimate in March. He now admitted that they were intimate in May. He also admitted to Nichol that before he met her, he and Shannan were trying to conceive, which was probably about the time Nikki left to her truck. But they ended up coming to a resolution, and Chris ended up convincing Nichol that she was in fact the woman he wanted to be with, and he was 100% ready to give all of this up for her. During that time, Shannan made several unanswered calls to Chris, at least 10. Nichol made 4 outgoing calls to Chris. Of course, every single one of them was answered. And this is the earliest phone log that I have of calls between Nikki and Chris. It begins July 14th and it ends August 14th. 6:14 p.m., Chris spent nearly 2 hours online researching Dave Bunk minerals and Dioptase, which is a translucent emerald-colored mineral. We know by now, most of us know by now anyway, Nikki was very much into crystals and minerals, and I can only assume that Dioptase was a mineral that Nikki really liked. And while she told law enforcement that she never received gifts from Chris with the exception of a dozen roses for her birthday, I don't believe that to be the case, and you will see why. There is evidence of many purchases Chris made that appear to be for Nichol, not to mention all the dates that they went on were all paid for by Chris, which she even admitted. After the earlier events of the day, I would also assume that Chris wanted to make it up to her and show her that he was serious by researching something special just for her. I mean, what girl doesn't like when a guy catches on to one of your passions, right? And that surprises you with something to do with it. It's funny, I don't recall him surprising Shannan with anything. It's quite the opposite, actually, but it Moving on to July 15, 2018. There were no calls between Chris and Nikki. There were 2 calls from Nicole's mom 10 minutes apart, the first one being a voicemail. 12:36 p.m., Chris called Vivint again, held a 20-minute conversation, and he added Vivint as a contact in his phone. Seems that they are still having issues with that darn security system. 12:50 p.m., Chris took 3 pictures of his basement. At 4:35 p.m., Chris took 3 more images after organizing and cleaning for Shannan. So these photos were most likely taken to show Shannan the work that he had done before and after, like before and after photos. July 16th, 2018 at 5:01 a.m., Chris calls Nikki for 3 minutes. At 8:35 a.m., Chris took 3 photos from Anadarko corporate office in Platteville, Colorado, one of which was a sunflower near what appears to be his work truck. He took this photo and many others over the time of his affair with Nikki, and he sent them to her. She has an affinity with flowers, and she had a wide assortment of flower pics on her own phone that police discovered. 12:26 p.m., Chris resumed his search of Dave Bunk Minerals. 1:29 to 1:33 p.m., Chris searched Google on topics like touch-up paint bottles, Toyota dealership, Highway 85, and Toyota dealership, Brighton. We know Kessinger owned a Toyota 4Runner. It was white. There's a photo of her next to it. And Nichol would mention during one of her interviews, or maybe even a couple, I don't know, I just know for sure she did it in one, that he took care of her in a way that no other man had. Like, he helped her out. He fixed things for her. He made sure that her car was running good, whatever. 3:46 p.m. is the first phone call in July that Nichol makes to Jim. They hold a 19-minute conversation. I can't find any call logs before this one, which is not in Discovery, by the way. I guess it used to be in Discovery, and then they replaced this call log with the August to September call log, which, we needed the July. Honestly, I would like to have April through. We should be able to, whatever. I'm not going to even talk about what we should have and what we shouldn't. July 17th at 5:01 a.m., Chris calls Nikki for 2 minutes, and then at 6:20, Nikki calls Jim for 6 minutes. At 10:12 a.m., Chris took several pictures of trees and grassland flowers in an open prairie just north of Rogan, which is near where he works. It's actually near Survey. He may have been in Survey. 2:20 p.m., Chris texts Nikki, hope it's 2:30, you need some rest, boo. Probably talking about when she gets off work. 3:07 p.m., Nikki calls Jim for 26 minutes. 4:37 p.m., Chris took a picture of his new work boots. These are the same Red Wing boots that were found in the Lexus during the search. 7:38 p.m., Nikki calls Chris for 3 minutes. July 18th, 2018 at 9:46 a.m., Chris began transferring photos of Nikki into the secret calculator app. About 100 images in total were there. This day, he had transferred about 25 images. Between 5:30 a.m. and 4:40 p.m., there are 6 calls made between Nikki and Chris. At 4:34 p.m., a call on Nikki's phone registered in Frederick, Colorado. Nichol left a voicemail. At 4:40 p.m., Chris called Nichol back and they held an 11-minute conversation. It would appear that Nichol was at or near Chris's home and then left and called him shortly after leaving, because 12 minutes later, at 4:52 p.m., Nichol calls Jim, and at that point, her phone pings in Broomfield, Colorado. So possibly she just left Chris's house to go home. 4:52 p.m., like I said, Nikki calls Jim. The call lasts 6 minutes. At 5:11 p.m., Jim calls Nikki for 16 minutes. 5:27 p.m., Jim calls Nikki and talks for 13 minutes. At 7:26 p.m., Chris searched for vacation rentals in Myrtle Beach, specifically Shore Haven in North Myrtle Beach. There has been speculation that Chris was looking at places for Nikki and Jim to stay during that week that he was going to be in North Carolina so that he could still be close to Nikki. I have a very hard time believing this. There are photos and videos of a woman on the beach in South Carolina that people say are Nichol Kessinger, wearing this same brown bikini. There's also people saying that this woman at the airport just behind Chris here is also Nichol Kessinger. First of all, In regards to the beach, that is not the same bikini. It looks like a tube top. It doesn't have the same strap, tie, whatever that Nikki's has. It looks like a tube top. It also does not look brown to me at all. Second of all, more factually, there are calls made from Chris to Nichol while he was in North Carolina, and her phone was registering that she was at home. She was also at work. She was making other calls to other people, all registering in Colorado in different locations in Colorado. So make that make sense. How her phone is pinging all over Colorado, but she's in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. But anyway, getting back to the day we're on, which is July 18th, at 9:04 p.m., Chris called Nikki for 2 minutes. This was also the date that Chris searched for the Oxycodone. Now, I've seen some talk about which it was, Oxycodone or Oxycontin, and even I was questioning this in my last video, asking if there was even a such thing as 80 milligrams of Oxycodone. So I looked it up. And just to clear that up, from what I found anyway, if you want to take my word for it, otherwise you can look it up yourself if it's that important to you. But Oxycontin is the extended release form of Oxycodone. It is slower to metabolize and it works for a longer period of time for people with very severe long-term pain. It is often what is first used for people in the end stages of cancer. It is not typically prescribed to people with chronic pain disorders or illnesses. Even oxycodone is very rarely prescribed. Oftentimes, oxycodone with acetaminophen, aka Percocet, is very rarely prescribed. So these drugs are not easy to obtain in prescription form from a doctor, especially when you take the opioid crisis into consideration, which started around 2018. So it will remain a mystery as to how Chris Watts got these pills, because like I said in the last video, if Shannan Watts had this prescription, even from her, let's say her neck surgery, why wouldn't Chris just say so? You know, like, where'd I get the oxy? Well, it was Shannan's from a prescription. We already had it. It was in the basement. And Chris wasn't even with it enough to say that. And it would have been completely believable, even if it were a lie. But he didn't say that. What he said was, he will take it to his grave. I will never reveal my source of the oxy that I used to attempt to cause a miscarriage of my unborn son. I will take that to the grave. Like, good for you, Chris. Good for you. We'll get into more of that later, though. Let's get back to the timeline. We are on July 19th of 2018. At 5:16 a.m., Chris calls Nikki for 1 minute, which seems to be a pattern or routine at this point if you hadn't noticed. He makes these morning phone calls to Nichol during the work week. Like you see here, 5:30 a.m., Chris calls Nichol for 5 minutes. Another pattern that you'll notice is that very often in between Chris and Nikki's phone calls, Nikki calls Jim. As you see here, 6:20 a.m., Nichol calls Jim for 28 minutes. At 10:41 a.m., Chris called a no-name, no-number contact. And I think that's a little coincidental considering that this was right after he Googled the oxy, right? This is the one and only time there is a call like this from Chris. There is a call like this on Nichol's phone log as well that you will see later on, but it's a little suspicious.
That's suspicious.
At 3:20 p.m., Nikki calls her dad for 1 minute. 5:06 p.m., Nikki calls Chris for 39 minutes. Directly after that phone call, Nikki calls Jim for 1 minute. 8:35 p.m., Chris logs into Facebook. July 20th, 2018, 5:15 a.m., Chris calls Nikki for 21 minutes. At 1:59 p.m., Chris logged into Snapchat on some kind of Toyota page group. 5:04 p.m., Chris searched Google for best beer in Colorado. 5:23 through 7:57 p.m., Chris searched Google for a CVS pharmacy in Westminster. Again, another coincidence that this pharmacy search was conducted 2 days after Chris made a search for Oxy and 1 day after a sketchy phone call Chris made to an unidentified name and number. It's all speculation, just throwing it out there as I see it. During this time, Chris also searched DC Oaks Brewhouse and Eatery, the Vandermeer ticket office for the NHRA National scheduled for July 21st, and 24-hour fitness locations in Westminster and Thornton. We know Nikki lived in Thornton, which was about 30 plus minutes south of Chris's home. I suppose there would only be one reason he would search that gym in that specific location, and that would be Nikki. At 6:12 p.m., Chris transferred pictures of Nichol into his secret calculator app. It was said by both Chris and Nikki that the sex between them tapered down after the July 14th argument. Even though that disagreement was resolved, something remained off with Chris, according to Nikki. It was said that that was because another thing that was revealed during that July 14th conversation was that Nikki was still on the eHarmony dating site and had dates planned with other men that she either did not go on or ended up being stood up. This bothered Chris, even though he said he knew it was hypocritical of him to be jealous about Nikki possibly dating someone else at the same time. My opinion on this is he was pissed. I mean, this is a man who is legit breaking up his family for Nichol. He told her this every single time she needed to hear it, yet she was still putting herself out there to other men as if she were available. And this is just my opinion. Because of this weighing on Chris's mind, he was unable to perform with Nikki on this night of July 20th, 2018, even after 4 attempts by Nikki to seduce him in all the ways he liked her to. After this, their sexual relations went from 4 to 5 times a day to only 2 to 3 times a day. I mean, this had to be a huge hit, given that their relationship was predominantly based on lust. In my opinion, of course. It is so often that people get in a situation of lust and it's so strong that it almost feels like love, but it's not. And a lot of times by the time you realize that it's just lust, someone's got a broken heart. July 21st, 2018 is Vandermeer Speedway Day. They also ate tacos at the Rooftop Tavern in Morrison, Colorado. At 10:34 p.m., Chris transferred some more images of Nichol into his secret calculator. There were no calls to Chris until 4:26 p.m., but there are calls to Jim from Nikki before then. At 1:05 p.m., Nikki calls Jim for 28 minutes. She's in Thornton, she's at home. 2:59 p.m., Nikki calls Jim for 2 minutes, still in Thornton. 4:26 p.m., Chris calls Nikki for 1 minute. This is in Morrison, Colorado at Vandermeer. So that's a little weird. Maybe they got separated at some point. At 4:50 p.m., Nikki calls this phone number. Her phone is pinging in Morrison. I need to see who this call was to, because whatever it was for 3 minutes. I wonder what it was for. It's probably nothing. I don't know. I need to see what it's to. 6:18 p.m. to 10:39 p.m. Chris filmed with his phone assorted clips of dragsters at Vandermeer. Throughout this time frame, Chris also searched Google on topics like top fuel dragster burnout and top fuel dragster goes airborne. July 22nd, 2018, Nikki calls her mom and her mom calls her between 7:13 a.m. and 8:22 a.m. All calls are about 5 minutes or less. At 9 a.m., Chris searched Google for Home Depot near me, and he put Broomfield. Now that's on the way to Nikki's house. Again, another search made by Chris that was likely to help Nikki out. 1:48 p.m., Chris searched Spanish dancing near me, red wine made in Argentina, and the Cheesecake Factory. He's a real Casanova, isn't he? 1:54 p.m., Nikki calls Chris for 54 minutes. Oh, that's weird. 1:54. July 23rd, 2018, 5:15 a.m. Chris calls Nikki for a minute. He then calls her back again at 5:30, talks for 4 minutes, again, making those morning calls to Nikki. And then, of course, after they get off the phone, Nikki making her morning calls to Jim. 6:22 a.m., Nikki calls Jim for 32 minutes. 7 a.m., Jim calls Nikki for 22 minutes. 8:25 a.m., Chris transferred another image into secret calculator. 4:56 p.m., Nikki calls her dad for 46 minutes. 5:49 p.m., Chris calls Nikki for 3 minutes. At 6:02 p.m., Chris searched Google for clean eating restaurants near me and near Erie, which is also near him. Well, unless he wasn't home. He also searched 24 Karat Bistro and Lazy Dog Restaurant. At 6:05 p.m., Nikki called Chris for 2 minutes. 7:27, Nikki calls Chris for 7 minutes. And Chris spent $39.66 at the Lazy Dog, as is reflected in his July 24th statement. July 24th, 5:15 a.m., Chris calls Nikki. 5:29 a.m., Chris calls Nikki again. 8:12 a.m., Chris transfers a nude image of Nikki into his secret calculator. 1:17 p.m., Nikki searched Google for "man I'm having an affair with, says he will leave his wife." At 4:06 p.m., Shannan's mom, Sandy, called Chris 12 different times, connecting on occasion, and in total held roughly 30 minutes of conversations between those calls. At 5:28 p.m., Chris searches for... Sandy called Chris 12 different times. They had about 30 minutes of conversation between all of those 12 calls. Now, why do you think Sandy was calling him? Obviously, her daughter is upset, and Mama Bear wants to know what is going on. Unlike Cindy and Ronnie, Sandy and Frank, Shannan's parents, loved Chris. They thought he was an amazing husband and father, so they were very close with him. They looked at him as a son. And Sandy's calling him being like, what is going on? Shannan is a wreck. As soon as they get off the phone, at 5:28 p.m., Chris is searching for Victoria's Secret at the Orchard Town Center, where he spends $180.28 there, likely on Nichol. As you can see from this receipt, dated July 25th, the next day, as his purchases are always seeming to be posted 24 hours later, which is exactly how my bank does it too. This is what I'm talking about. When I said earlier that Nikki received many gifts from Chris, Victoria's Secret isn't necessarily cheap. $180 is a decent amount of money for someone to spend on their significant other on lingerie. It is extremely frustrating to look at Chris's searches, phone calls, and behaviors, activities, while also being able to see Shannan's continued attempts to even get a response from Chris. Even her mother is trying to figure out where his head is at. It is clear by his history of all of these things that he has completely checked out of his relationship at this point with Shannan, focusing entirely on Nichol, as is reflected here as well, where at 5:30 p.m., Shannan texts Chris if he's even alive. Chris gives a bullshit excuse for not communicating with her, to which Shannan texts back a few things, one being, "or think you're with another girl," or worse. She hit the nail right on the head with that text. He had just gotten done purchasing lingerie at Victoria's Secret, $130 worth. At 6:02 p.m., Shannan texted Chris more about their relationship and what she felt was missing, telling him that she missed him, wondering if he missed her, saying, "We've been together 8 years and we have 2.5 kids together." He doesn't respond to her, though he does make sure to answer these 2 calls for Nikki. 7:44 p.m., 1-minute conversation, and 8:43 p.m., Nikki calls Chris for a 3-minute conversation. July 25th, 2018, at 5:30 a.m., Chris makes his morning call to Nikki. 6 minutes. 8:41 a.m. to 12:07 p.m., Chris searches when to say I love you. When to say I love you for the first time in a new relationship. What do you feel when someone tells you they love you? Now that last search is a bit telling in my opinion. There's been a lot of speculation about whether or not Chris was a narcissist, sociopath, or even a psychopath. But a lot of people feel like he was incapable of having real emotions. I definitely have my own opinions on that topic, and I will talk about it, probably more in my conclusion of the series. But having to Google search how a person feels when someone says I love you could imply that he doesn't really know what it truly feels like to hear those 3 little words. That he knows what it should feel like, but he doesn't understand how it really feels. Now, whether or not he's wondering how it would feel for Nikki to hear it, or how he should feel if Nikki said it to him, who knows? But it's kind of weird. And also, what would that mean for Shannan? Did he ever really love her? Or did he just do what he thought he was supposed to do for a man at his age? Get married, have a family, etc. He and his family said that it was a goal of his to get married and to have a family. But I wonder how much of that came from him and how much of that came from the expectations of his family. At 5:36 p.m., the NK Giggles voicemail occurs. This voicemail was left while Chris was on the phone with Shannan, and he called Nikki back right after. These voicemails are cringy as fuck. Sorry, not sorry. It's the truth. I mean, aren't they? Let me just play them for you again to reiterate the massive amount of cringe contained within these voicemails.
Hi. It's me. I guess just call me back when you have a chance. Bye.
Hi. It's me. I miss your face. I was just calling to say hi. Call me back. Bye.
Now, obviously, she did this on purpose. She giggled like that on purpose. I mean, you can hear the stark comparison between her voice in these voicemails and her voice in her interviews.
I'm not trying to be with somebody that's in another relationship.
I guess just call me back when you have a chance. Bye.
But she didn't do this purposely just because she's creepy. She did it because Chris had a special love for that giggle. And he says it in that card that he gave her that I read at the beginning about how, quote, that giggle gets me every time, unquote. He liked it, so she gave it to him. 6:31 p.m., Chris searches for sand dunes weather, probably in preparation for their trip to the Great Sand Dunes that was coming up that Saturday. 6:58 p.m., Chris calls Nikki. At 7:14 p.m., right after she hangs up with Chris, Nikki calls Jim for 19 minutes. 7:34 p.m., Chris calls Nikki for 2 minutes. Just after that call ends, Nikki calls Jim for 1 minute. So again, this triangle of calls being made with Nikki being the main point of contact. It's just weird.
That's weird.
And it continues. You're going to see. It continues. July 26, 2018 at 5:30 a.m., Chris makes his morning call to Nikki. 9:08 a.m., Nikki makes her morning call to Jim. A little bit after Nikki ends that phone call with Jim, she calls a man by the name of Robert. I'm not sure of his last name. Some people have said it and I missed it and now I can't find it anywhere, but this is the person who has been called Nichol's spiritual advisor. Robert is allegedly a member of a spiritual or religious group called Ordo Templi Orientis, which roughly translates to Order of the East. Ordo Templi Orientis is a religious organization that was founded by mystic Karl Kellner in 1895. Kellner's beliefs were derived off of Freemasonry, and they were later picked up by Aleister Crowley's teaching of thelema and sex magic, with a goal of tackling and perfecting sexual forces. I know, you guys, just bear with me because I do believe it is important to talk about this. The order believes in liberating individuals through light, love, and life. The order also believes 100% in free will and that you should exercise your free will always. In 1918, Aleister Crowley brought in the practice of thelema and the belief and mantra, quote, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," unquote, which I interpret to be like, do whatever you want to do. Don't be ashamed. Don't be concerned with the consequences, which sounds like a dream for someone who already utilizes that type of logic, doesn't it? And Lord help me if anyone ever looks into my search history, because of course I wanted to learn more about this alleged sex cult and sex magic.
I want to know more.
So I did some searching of my own, and I also went on Reddit. I looked at people who said that they had been members, but ended up leaving for their own individual reasons.
It's all a little shady if you ask me.
Which brings us to educational purposes time. All I can say is buckle up. I'm about to break it all down for you in a nutshell, and hope this part of the video passes YouTube policy checks. Keep in mind, I'm simply reading off of a website or websites information. I am not a member, nor did I have any prior knowledge of what this even was before the Watts case. I also want to say that I am a firm believer that you can believe in whatever you choose to believe in as long as it is your own choice. Brainwashing and force are not choice. Neither is trickery or manipulation, in my opinion, of course. I'm not knocking this religion down. I'm just explaining a part of it that has been the topic of a few theories out there. I don't know if any of these theories hold any water or not. I am going to leave that entirely up to you guys to decide for yourselves. All right, so here we go. So from what I understand, again, this is my understanding of what I have learned about Ordo Templi Orientis in a nutshell, which is that there are triads, and within each triad are degrees, starting at 0 and going up to 12. I'm not going to read them all off. This is the chart. To be honest, I have zero idea what any of it means. This video is not about this group specifically, though I do think it is important that we understand what it is in a nutshell, so that we can decide if it is simply a conspiracy theory or a legit theory that could make sense in this case. Now, this group is not just about sex. It is not a sex cult, though they do practice sex magic. While much of this sex magic is through yoga and tantric exercises, there are some practices that are straight up bizarre to anyone who's not in this group. Now, I'm not going to read this all aloud to you, but it is here for you to read as much as you are comfortable with. Feel free to pause if you'd like. All of these things are mainly in the hermit triad, and it's pretty intense, in my opinion. In fact, my opinion goes far beyond intense. I'm actually grossed out now, but to each their own, right? It's not my place to judge. The point is, OTO does incorporate a great deal of sex rituals and practices. Why does this matter? Because Nichol Kessinger was tied to a member of the OTO. Though through her phone records, she only contacted this particular member 3 times within the phone records that we're able to gather. The times do seem to be important. The first time she contacts Robert is this day, June 26, 2018. The second time she contacts Robert is August 10th of 2018, which is the day before that quote-unquote date where the dark things allegedly took place at her apartment. And then the most interesting of all is the third date, August 13th, 2018, before leaving work to go home to gym. What is the significance? One can only speculate. But when combined with Chris Watts' confessions of dark things happening at Nichole's house, as well as certain searches made by Nichol before the last quote-unquote date that she and Chris ever went on, I can agree that it could be possible that OTO sex magic was introduced to Chris Watts by Nichol Kessinger. One thing that I do know is that whether or not you believe in the power of spells and magic, it can be very dangerous if you don't know what you are doing. Let's move on for now, because we will get more into this later in the series, most likely in the rumors and theories part. But I did want to say that there is a location for the OTO right outside of Denver, as you can see here. So do with that what you will for now. Like I said, we're probably going to get back into this in the rumors and theories part. 10:26 a.m., Chris texts Nikki. There it is. You deserve a pay increase. Whatever that's about. 11:50 a.m. Chris searches for G.I.T. JIT. I'm not at all sure what this means or stands for. I obviously searched for it on a few different search engines, but it could be any one of a number of things, one of which includes a Latin rock band. Now, he searched in all caps with the periods in between the letters, so you would think that would narrow it down, but not really. And he was looking up Spanish dancing too, so I wouldn't put it past him that he was looking up this Latin rock band. I don't know. 4:01 p.m., Chris calls Chase Bank. 4:28 p.m., Chris accessed my prepaid center, as he often does. That is how he puts the money on his Anadarko gift cards. At 4:40 p.m., Shannan calls Chris, and while they're on the phone, Chris transfers a nude selfie of Nikki to the secret calculator app. I mean, that's the type of stuff that just makes my blood boil for Shannan. Like, ugh. And you know, I'm a little bit biased when it comes to that because I have been in Shannan's situation more times than I'd like to admit. I gave more chances than I ever should have. And to look at this, oh gosh, all right. At 5:01, Chris calls Vivint briefly. More issues with the home security system. 5:03 p.m., Nikki calls Chris for 6 minutes. At 5:16 p.m., Chris calls Vivint again for 25 minutes. You know, here's more issues with the home security system. Like, what the heck is up with that? And again, around the time he has plans with Nichol. At 6:39 p.m., Chris calls Shannan for 5 minutes. Oh, he could give her 5 minutes of his time, but he had plans. So at 7:13 p.m., Chris searched Lazy Dog in Erie. This is the Lazy Dog that's by the Watts home. At 8 p.m., Chris visited myprepaidcenter.com, probably checking his gift card balance or adding money to it. July 27th at 6:20 p.m., Nikki calls Jim for 2 minutes. 7:11 p.m., Nikki leaves a voicemail to Chris. 7:17 p.m., Chris calls Nikki back for 2 minutes. 7:21 p.m., Nikki calls Jim for 15 minutes. See, Jim, Chris, Jim. 8:48 p.m., Chris searched prices on wine openers. On this day, Chris spent $13 at Super Target, possibly buying a wine opener. Chris also spent $1 for parking near the Cheesecake Factory in Denver. He also spent $47.83 at Glacier Liquors, maybe for the wine. And he spent $26.35 at the Cheesecake Factory in Denver. That's kind of cheap. They must have just got dessert. But again, here's some more money spent on Nichol when at the same time, Chris is complaining to Nichol that he's not allowed to spend money and that they can hardly afford their mortgage anymore and they're a month behind. Chris also brought condoms to Nikki's apartment on this occasion, and Nikki said that he brought with him one full unopened box and a set from a partially used box. Nikki questioned the old partially used box as she found it strange that Chris was using condoms with his wife. Chris told Nikki that Shannan didn't like to get messy, but he admitted that the last time he was intimate with Shannan, they had not used one. Nikki then searched Google for how long condoms can be used before they're considered expired. I mean, hey, at least they're being safe, right? It does have me questioning why this is the first time that Nikki brought up condoms during her interview, considering that the two of them had already been having sex between 2 and 5 times a day, every day that they were together, which, according to Chris, was the entire month of July. Chris said Nikki wanted Chris at her place every single night. I don't know. Maybe she supplied them, or maybe they just decided to use them, or maybe they were for Jim. I don't know. July 28th, 2018, equipped with condoms, wine bottle openers, and whatever else, Nikki and Chris prep for their trip to the Great Sand Dunes. Chris, having slept over at Nikki's house, didn't warrant any calls to Nikki, but Nikki still made her morning calls to Jim. At 6:26 a.m., Nikki calls Jim for 6 minutes. 6:38 a.m., Jim calls Nikki for 8 minutes. People have speculated for a long time now that Jim joined the two of them on the sand dunes excursion. There is no solid evidence of that. What there is solid evidence of is Nikki making or receiving phone calls to and from Jim while Chris was with her more than several times throughout these weeks. Yet she has maintained that the two didn't know about each other. She has mainly made the statement that has become famous, quote, "Leave Jim alone," unquote.
I would really not like to involve him in this. He does not know about this. He doesn't know any of this is occurring. Okay. He doesn't know who Chris is. I do not know.
So he's just a friend of yours.
Yes. He does not need to be dragged into this.
Apartment and doesn't know anything about Chris. Does he know anything about Chris?
Nothing. Absolutely not.
So Jim is understand from an investigative point, he could be a person who could say, yeah, I was there at 3:45. He doesn't know Chris. He doesn't know anything. He could say with one phone call, yeah, she came in at 3:45. Done.
Totally.
Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And I don't have to ask anything more than or Jim. And I'm not saying you have to go to
just leave Jim alone. Jim does not need to be wrapped up in this.
If at some point I needed Jim's info to, let's say we couldn't find your phone records,
You can have them. I will give them to you.
Would you tell me who Jim was?
If you had to. I don't really want to involve him in this. That's not fair to him. That's not, no. If I do not have to do that.
That's fine.
Jim doesn't know anything. He doesn't even know Chris. Chris even found this statement puzzling, writing to his inmate buddy David Carter, quote, "The discovery shows she called Jim consistently before me and after me, yet she says Jim didn't know him," unquote. Upon arrival to their destination, Chris purchases sandboards, firewood, and souvenirs at the shop, while Nikki pays for the food and snacks. The one and only time I know of that she used her money when she was with Chris. At 10:58 a.m., Nikki makes a call to a phone number, and at this time her phone pings in Fort Garrya, Colorado. At 11 a.m., Chris makes the exact same call, which is found to be Valley View Hot Springs at the Orient Land Trust. At 11:34 a.m., Chris searched for Rio Grande National Forest, Zapata Falls Campground, which is located about 7 miles south of the Great Sand Dunes. Chris made a brief call to the campground moments later. At 12:53 p.m., Chris took this tent photo along with a video of the same scene. They were taken at the Zapata Falls Campground. The song in the background of the video is Forever Girl by John Longston, which appears to be a ballad. This was found by Detective Prill using Shazam. At 1:44 p.m., Shannan made an unanswered call to Chris. 10 minutes later, Chris made 2 attempts to call her back. At 2:29 p.m., Chris took assorted photos of the landscape at the Great Sand Dunes. Among these photos is the video of Nikki saying what a wonderful time she was having.
Thank you so much for coming out here with me, Christopher. I am having a wonderful time. You mean a lot to me, and I'm glad that you're having a blast. I am so out of breath.
Now, I always assumed she took that on her phone and sent it to him, but in the discovery, it almost appears that she took that on his phone. Does she have the code to his phone? If she did, that's kind of controlling right off the bat, isn't it? I don't know. She does seem like the type of person that needs to know her boyfriend's passcode to his phone. July 29th, 2018, at 9:22 a.m., Chris continued to take photographs near the dunes. 10:38 a.m., Chris transferred photos, including a full nude selfie of Nikki, into his secret calculator. 10:55 a.m., Chris texts Shannan, quote, "Finish the hike, packing up and heading home," unquote. So he had told Shannan he would be gone, yet he made up false details about where he was really going and most definitely who he was going with. At 12:36 p.m., Shannan made 4 unanswered calls to Chris. 7:39 p.m., Nikki calls Chris for 4 minutes. She is back home in Thornton from their trip and begins to do her phone dance with Chris and Jim. 8:13 p.m., Nikki calls Jim for 21 minutes. 8:34 p.m., Nikki calls Chris for 2 minutes. 8:38 p.m., Nikki calls Chris again for 1 minute. On July 30th of 2018 at 5:30 a.m., Chris goes back to making his morning calls to Nikki. They speak for 3 minutes. At 8:11, Shannan sent Chris USAA insurance info for the Lexus. At 9:18 a.m., Shannan sent Chris images of swelling to the right ankle of one of their daughters. I do think this is Bella. And Chris commented on that photo, quote, "It looks like her ankle is dislocated in that one picture," unquote. Shannan agreed and said, quote, "She may need special shoes," unquote. At 4:43 p.m., Nikki leaves a voicemail to Chris. This is the second installment of what have been fittingly dubbed, quote, "creepy giggles," unquote, by Detective Prill. 4:48 p.m., Chris calls Nikki back for 8 minutes. 5:14 p.m., Chris calls Vivint for 10 minutes. So we can see the security system breakdown is still a problem. In my opinion, Shannan had to be suspicious of this Vivint issue by now, for sure. In my opinion, Shannan was suspicious of a lot of things by now, and maybe even thinking about some things in hindsight as being suspicious. You know, putting the pieces together of all this weird behavior over the last few weeks. While it would take her a while to confide in her friends about these suspicions,
her intuition was definitely making waves, telling her that all of these things together were too much of a coincidence to not be a system breakdown of their marriage in the making. At 5:22 p.m., Nikki leaves another voicemail for Chris. 2 minutes later, at 5:24 p.m., Chris calls Nikki back, and they talk for 39 minutes. At 5:39, Shannan asked Chris what they said, they being Vivint. Although this call with Vivint ended nearly 30 minutes earlier, Chris responded that he was still on the phone, resetting settings and sensitivity. Quote, "Should be good now. I'll monitor it," unquote. At 6:31 p.m., Chris searched Google for songs by a reggae band named Through the Roots. Chris then searched for lyrics to their song, Down to Earth. These lyrics included, quote, "When I'm around you, I can feel peace. If I'm ever cold, I can count on you to heat me up with your presence. And at the lowest level, you can make me feel sky high," unquote. As well as other lyrics that were quoted by Chris in that card that he wrote to Nikki on this same date, as you can see here and as we saw earlier. So they were lyrics. 6:37 p.m., Chris searched for a country singer by the name of Kanan Smith and his song Love You Like That, with lyrics like, "When I'm with you, I can see down the road, girl. Not just the gravel one we're traveling on, girl. And I'm betting that it's going to be a wild ride, but I promise I'm going to be there by your side. I think we got another memory in the making," unquote. Did you like that? I know, I got skills, right? 6:38 p.m., Chris searched love letters, possibly getting more ideas of what to write to Nikki off of Google. Obviously, he needs songs and Google to express his feelings. At 7:49 p.m., Nikki calls Jim for 4 minutes. At 7:54 p.m., Nikki calls Chris for 1 minute. And at 7:57, Chris texts Shannan that he was, quote, "letting Dieter out and going to bed, boo. Love you," unquote. Shannan called him minutes later and they spoke briefly. This is the day before he would be leaving for North Carolina. On this day, Chris also spent 6161 at BJ's restaurant, which is reflected in a statement July 31st. This was Nikki and Chris's last night together before he went off to North Carolina to be with his family. This is also the date that Chris wrote that second card we just talked about, which he probably gave her at dinner. July 31st, 2018. Chris flies to North Carolina. At 3:22 a.m., Chris took a photo of parking signs at Denver Airport and sent messages to Shannan at airport. 4:08 a.m., Chris began transferring a mass amount of assorted images of Nikki and their trip to the Great Sand Dunes into his secret calculator app, as well as videos of Nikki surfing down the dunes, with Chris making comments like, quote, "so damn sexy," unquote.
There you go, baby. You're so damn sexy.
4:46 a.m., Chris told Shannan, quote, "on the plane, love you, boo," unquote. Shannan called him immediately for 2 minutes. 4:50 a.m., immediately after hanging up, Shannan texts Chris, quote, "you never listen to me," unquote. And, quote, "how much a day," unquote. Chris sent her the pictures of the parking sign and advised $16. Shannan replied with, quote, $130 we can't spend at the beach," unquote. Shannan then asks Chris to text her when he lands in Atlanta, and he agrees. In my opinion, at this point, Chris is planning on having a fabulous time with his family in North Carolina. He already understood that he was walking into the lion's den upon arrival due to the quote-unquote Nutgate incident and the family rift, and now he had pissed Shannan off again by wasting money on parking. Another tick on his list of resentments towards Shannan. 4:52, Chris deleted Nikki's APC Health and Safety Environmental contact from his phone. 4:58 a.m., Chris calls Nikki for 5 minutes.
7:57 a.m., Chris texts Shannan he landed in Atlanta. In the discovery, it is noted that there is a time change from Mountain Time to Eastern Time, but the discovery stuck with Mountain Time so as not to confuse people. And here we see the back and forth calls between Nikki and Jim and Nikki and Chris again. I mean, when you look at this highlighted call log, it is undeniable that it is strange. I mean, right? It's like back to back to back to back to back. It also appears that without Chris to talk to, her dependence on Jim grows. She's calling Jim quite a bit. 8:22 a.m., Nikki calls Jim for 1 minute. I think she leaves a voicemail. Immediately after, still 8:22 a.m., Jim calls Nikki for 12 minutes. 8:48 a.m., Jim calls Nikki for 1 minute. 8:53 a.m., Jim calls Nikki for 4 minutes. I do think the 1 minute conversations are voicemails. 9:02 a.m., Nikki calls Jim for 8 minutes. 10:18 a.m., Chris texts Shannan that he landed in Raleigh, North Carolina. 3:49 p.m., Chris takes this brief moment to call Nikki for 4 minutes. A little bit after Nikki hangs up with Chris, Nikki calls Jim for 8 minutes. 4:48 p.m., Jim calls Nikki for 13 minutes. 8:33 p.m., Nikki calls Jim for 2 minutes. 9:49, Shannan texts Chris, quote, "Can you set an alarm for 5 and wake me, please?" Unquote. Chris replied, quote, "Yep, I got it. Love you." Unquote. Shannan reciprocated. 10:19 p.m., Chris calls Nikki for 38 minutes. Gotta make sure to get those Nikki calls in, even though, allegedly he's supposed to be working on his marriage, and Nikki was going to give him the time to do that. We're going to talk a lot more about that in the next video. So this is where we're going to stop part 3, episode 1. I obviously did decide to split part 3 up, and this is the perfect place to break. In the next video, we will pick up on August 1st, which is Chris's arrival to North Carolina, what he was doing, what Nikki was doing, and the timeline will continue through August. Please, if you are interested in this series, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you are notified of my next download. I am in the middle of packing up and moving. I'm switching my kids' schools around, and doctors and dentists. We're moving about an hour and a half away from where we are, so I am extremely busy, but I am wanting to get these videos out for you guys. So please make sure you hit that notification bell. Even if you are already subscribed, go back and hit the bell so that you're notified. I don't want you to miss anything. And also, of course, if you found this video to be a good source of information on this case, please like it and feel free to share. That way it gets in the YouTube algorithm and other people are able to see it. As always, please be safe, be happy, be healthy, and most of all, be unapologetically you. Bye-bye.